My name is Dr. Kate Sullivan. I've been working emergency medicine for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Overdoses, car accidents, domestic violence cases, heart attacks, you name it. The human body can endure incredible trauma, and the human mind can be even more fragile. But what happened during my shift last October still keeps me awake some nights, and I honestly don't know if I'll ever make sense of it. I work at Mercy General, a mid-sized hospital in what used to be a quiet suburban area. It's not the busiest ER in the state, but we get our share of action, especially on weekend nights when people make questionable decisions. Most of my colleagues prefer day shifts, but I've always been a night owl. There's something about the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift that I find oddly peaceful. The hospital gets quieter. The pace slows down just enough that you can actually think between patients, and there's less administrative nonsense to deal with. That particular night started like any other. I came in around 10:45, grabbed coffee from the break room, terrible coffee, but it does the job, and checked in with Dr. Hayes, who was finishing up his evening shift. Nothing unusual in the pipeline. A few minor injuries waiting in triage, one elderly woman with chest pains who was probably just having anxiety, and a teenager who'd cut his hand working on a car. Standard Tuesday night stuff. The first few hours were routine. I treated the chest pain patient, anxiety, as suspected, stitched up the kid's hand, and saw a handful of other cases that barely registered. Around 2:30 a.m., things had slowed to the point where I was actually catching up on paperwork, which never happens. That's when the ambulance call came in. The paramedics radioed ahead about a 34-year-old male, found unconscious in his apartment by a neighbor who heard screaming. No obvious trauma, vitals stable but unusual, and the guy was completely unresponsive. They'd tried everything, pain stimuli, verbal commands, even smelling salts, nothing. He was breathing on his own, heart rate steady, but it was like nobody was home. When they wheeled him in, I got my first look at the patient. Average build, brown hair, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt. Nothing immediately concerning about his appearance, no signs of injury or illness. But there was something about his face that struck me as wrong. Not medically wrong, just off. His expression was completely blank, but his eyes were wide open, staring straight up at the ceiling. Not blinking, at all. I tried the usual responsiveness tests. Can you hear me? Can you squeeze my hand? Nothing. I checked his pupils, reactive to light, which was good. Blood pressure normal, oxygen saturation perfect, temperature slightly elevated but not concerning. From a purely medical standpoint, this guy should have been awake and talking, but he wasn't there. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the usual hospital odors of antiseptic and industrial cleaning products. But as I leaned closer to examine him, it became unmistakable. It smelled like soil, rich, damp earth, the kind you get in a garden after it rains, which made no sense. The paramedics said they found him in his apartment and his clothes were clean. I ordered the standard workup, blood tests, CT scan, the works, and had him moved to bed 3 in the back corner of the ER. It's the quietest spot, away from the main traffic flow, which seemed appropriate for someone in his condition. I figured we were looking at some kind of seizure disorder or maybe a rare reaction to medication. Weird cases happen. You work in medicine long enough, you learn to expect the unexpected. The blood work came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no signs of infection or metabolic issues. The CT scan showed a completely normal brain. By all measurable standards, this was a healthy 34-year-old man who should have been awake and alert. But he just lay there, staring at nothing. Around 4:15 a.m., I was reviewing his test results when Jenny, one of our night nurses, found me at the computer station. She had this worried expression I'd never seen on her before. Jenny's been working nights longer than I have, and she doesn't spook easily. "Dr. Sullivan," she said, keeping her voice low, "you need to see something in bed 3. I followed her back to where we'd placed the unconscious patient. The moment I walked into that corner of the ER, I felt it. The temperature had dropped noticeably, not just cool, but genuinely cold, like stepping into a refrigerator. My breath wasn't visible, but close. I looked around for a broken air conditioning vent or something that might explain it, but everything seemed normal. The patient was exactly as I'd left him, flat on his back, eyes open, staring upward. But now I could see his breath condensing slightly in the cold air, and the smell of soil was stronger. "How long has it been this cold in here?" I asked Jenny. "It just started about 10 minutes ago," she said. "I came to check his vitals, and it was like walking into a freezer." I approached the bed to examine him again, and that's when I noticed his lips were moving, just barely, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. I leaned closer, trying to hear if he was whispering something, but there was no sound. His mouth was forming words silently, over and over, the same pattern. I grabbed a penlight and angled it toward his mouth, trying to read his lips. It took me a few minutes to figure out what he was saying, but eventually I got it. He was repeating the same phrase, endlessly. "They're coming up. They're coming up. They're coming up." I stepped back, suddenly feeling very uncomfortable. The rational part of my brain kicked in. Maybe he was experiencing some kind of altered consciousness, dream state, or neurological episode that was causing repetitive speech patterns. It wasn't unheard of. But combined with the temperature drop and that earthy smell, something felt deeply wrong about the whole situation. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to wake him up, I sat down in the chair next to his bed and spoke to him conversationally, the way you might talk to someone you're not sure can hear you. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked. "Do you know where you are?" For the first time since he'd arrived, something changed. His lips stopped moving. His eyes, which had been staring straight up at the ceiling, slowly turned toward me. Not his head. His head stayed perfectly still, just his eyes, tracking over to look directly at me. I've seen thousands of patients in various states of consciousness, but I had never seen eyes like that. They were completely aware, completely present, but filled with a terror so intense it made my stomach clench. It was like looking at someone who was drowning, reaching out for help but unable to move or speak. "What's happening to you?" I whispered. His mouth opened wider, and for a moment I thought he was going to speak. Instead, the smell of soil became overwhelming, like someone had dumped a wheelbarrow full of dirt right next to the bed. And then I heard it, a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It was scratching, like fingernails on wood, but deeper, more deliberate. It seemed to be coming from underneath the bed, or maybe underneath the floor. I looked down, but of course there was nothing there. Just the standard hospital flooring and the usual medical equipment stored below. The scratching got louder, more frantic, and the patient's eyes grew wider with panic. His mouth was moving again, but this time I could hear the faintest whisper, "They're coming up. They're coming up." That's when I lost my professional composure. I stood up so fast the chair fell backward, and I backed away from the bed. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get away from that patient, away from that corner of the ER, away from whatever was happening. I found myself practically running to the nurse's station, where Jenny was typing notes into a computer. "Call security," I told her, "and get Dr. Whitaker on the phone." "Is everything okay?" she asked, but she was already reaching for the phone. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. Dr. Whitaker arrived within 15 minutes, impressive for 4:30 a.m. I explained the situation as objectively as I could, focusing on the medical aspects and downplaying the more inexplicable elements. Together we went back to bed 3. The temperature had returned to normal. The patient was unconscious again, his eyes closed, breathing peacefully. The smell was gone. When Dr. Whitaker tried to wake him, the man's eyes opened immediately, and he sat up with a confused but completely normal expression. "Where am I?" he asked, looking around the ER. "What happened?" We ran through the standard post-episode questions. His name was Jonathan Mercer. He remembered going to bed around midnight, but nothing after that until waking up in the hospital. No history of seizures, no drug use, no psychiatric issues. From his perspective, he'd simply lost 6 hours. We kept him for observation and ran additional tests, but everything came back normal. By 7 a.m., when my shift ended, he was ready for discharge, a perfectly healthy man who'd had some kind of unexplained episode. I never found out what happened to Jonathan Mercer after that night. I never followed up, never checked if he had any more episodes. Honestly, I didn't want to know. But I did start paying attention to the obituaries in our local paper, and about a month later, I saw a small notice. Jonathan Mercer, 34, had died suddenly in his sleep. No cause of death was listed. I know how this sounds. I know that as a medical professional, I'm supposed to look for rational explanations. Maybe he had an undiagnosed neurological condition. Maybe the temperature fluctuation was a coincidence. Maybe I imagined the scratching sounds because I was tired and unsettled. But I can't shake the feeling that something else was happening that night. Something that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with forces I don't understand and don't want to. I still work nights at Mercy General, but I've never seen anything like it since. And I hope I never do again. Sometimes, when I'm doing late-night rounds, I avoid that corner of the ER entirely. I know it's irrational, but I just can't bring myself to go back to bed 3. because part of me is terrified that if I listen closely enough, I might still hear scratching coming from underneath the floor, and I'm afraid of what it might mean if whatever was trying to come up that night finally made it to the surface. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and I've been working emergency medicine for 12 years. I chose this specialty because I like the unpredictability, the adrenaline, the fact that every shift brings something different. Most people think working in the ER is all gunshot wounds and heart attacks, but the reality is much more mundane. 90% of what we see is routine: stomach bugs, minor injuries, people who should have gone to urgent care but came here instead because they're impatient or scared. I work at St. Catherine's, a level 2 trauma center in a city that's seen better days. It's not the worst place to practice medicine, but it's not the best either. We get a mix of everything: suburban families, inner city residents, homeless people, college kids who make bad decisions. The hospital itself is older, built in the 1970s with that distinctive institutional architecture that makes every hallway look the same. This story happened about 3 years ago, during a particularly brutal winter. It was mid-February, and we'd been hit with back-to-back snowstorms that had kept people indoors for weeks. When the weather finally cleared enough for people to venture out, we got slammed. Cabin fever plus icy roads equals a busy night in the ER. I was about halfway through my shift when the call came in. A 42-year-old woman, car accident, unconscious but stable vitals. The paramedics said she'd hit a patch of ice on Highway 9 and slid into a tree. Nothing too unusual. We'd seen 6 similar cases that night alone. Her name was Lisa Hartwell, and according to her license, she lived about 20 minutes outside the city. When they brought her in, I did my initial assessment. She had a nasty bump on her forehead, probably from hitting the steering wheel, but no obvious fractures or internal injuries. Her pupils were responsive, breathing was normal, blood pressure slightly elevated but not concerning given the circumstances. Classic mild concussion presentation. I figured she'd wake up within the hour with a headache and maybe some temporary memory issues around the accident. We got her settled in bed 7 and I ordered the standard workup. CT scan to rule out brain bleeding, basic blood work, the usual. While we waited for the results, I moved on to other patients. Like I said, it had been a busy night. I had a kid with a broken wrist, an elderly man with chest pains, and a woman who was convinced she was having an allergic reaction to her new shampoo. Standard Tuesday night chaos. About an hour later, I was suturing a cut on someone's hand when I heard voices from bed 7. Lisa Hartwell was awake, which was good news. I finished up with the sutures and went to check on her. She was sitting up in bed, looking confused but alert. Her CT had come back normal, so I was expecting a routine discharge once I cleared her neurologically. "How are you feeling, Ms. Hartwell?" I asked, pulling up her chart on the computer. "I'm okay, I think," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something uncertain in her tone. "My head hurts, but that's probably normal, right?" "Absolutely normal," I said. "You hit your head pretty hard. Can you tell me what you remember about tonight?" She was quiet for a moment, pressing her fingertips to her temples like she was trying to focus. "I was driving home from work. Late night at the office, you know how it is. I remember getting on the highway, and then..." She paused, looking genuinely confused. "This is going to sound weird, but I remember everything." "Everything about the accident?" "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "Everything about being unconscious. Like, I remember lying in the car after I hit the tree. I remember the paramedics arriving, what they said to each other, the ride to the hospital. I remember being brought in here, you examining me, getting the CT scan, all of it, but I was unconscious the whole time." I felt a slight chill, though I tried to keep my expression neutral. In 12 years of emergency medicine, I'd never had a patient claim to remember events from while they were unconscious. Some people have vague recollections or dreamlike memories, but she was describing specific details with perfect clarity. Sometimes after head injuries, people can have very vivid dreams that feel like memories, I explained. It's not uncommon. "No, Dr. Webb," she said, and the fact that she knew my name caught me off guard. I hadn't introduced myself yet, and I wasn't wearing a name tag. "It wasn't a dream. I heard you tell the nurse that my pupils looked good. I heard you say my blood pressure was 140/90. I heard the radiologist call and say my CT was normal. She was right about the blood pressure reading. She was right about the CT results. But there was no way she could have heard the radiologist call. That conversation happened at the nurse's station, nowhere near her bed. I heard other things too," she continued, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Things I probably shouldn't have heard. What kind of things? Lisa looked around the ER, then back at me. I heard you on the phone with your ex-wife about your daughter's soccer tournament. I heard Nurse Patricia talking about her son's drug problem with the social worker. I heard Dr. Kim in bed 4 telling that elderly man that his chest pains were probably just anxiety, but she was worried it might be something more serious. My stomach dropped. The conversation with my ex-wife had happened in the break room during my dinner break. Patricia's personal discussion took place near the pharmacy, at the opposite end of the ER from bed 7. And Dr. Kim's quiet consultation with the chest pain patient happened behind a closed curtain in bed 4. There was no physical way Lisa could have overheard any of those conversations, even if she'd been conscious and walking around the entire time. How do you know all that? I asked, trying to keep the uneasiness out of my voice. I don't know, she said, and I could see she was genuinely disturbed by it. It's like I was everywhere at once. I could see the whole ER from above, hear every conversation, watch every patient. I saw the man in bed 2 hiding pills in his socks so you wouldn't know he'd taken them before coming in. I watched the teenager in bed 6 texting her dealer while her parents weren't looking. I heard the homeless woman in triage talking to someone who wasn't there. Every single thing she mentioned was accurate. The man in bed 2 had indeed been hiding pills. We'd found them during a more thorough examination. The teenager was a regular who came in claiming various ailments when she was actually looking for prescription drugs. And the homeless woman had been having an animated conversation with an invisible companion when she arrived. I need to ask you something, Lisa said, leaning forward slightly. And I need you to be honest with me. Was I dead? Dead? No, absolutely not. Your vitals were stable the entire time. But I wasn't breathing normally, was I? I remember feeling like I was floating, like I was watching everything from somewhere else. And I remember seeing my body lying in that car, and it looked... She paused, searching for the right word. Empty. I pulled up her ambulance report on the computer. The paramedics had noted that her breathing was shallow and irregular initially, requiring supplemental oxygen. Not unusual for someone who'd been unconscious, but combined with everything else she was telling me, it felt significant. I saw something else too, she said quietly. Something I'm not sure I should tell you about. What did you see? Lisa glanced around the ER again, then looked directly at me. I saw the little girl. What little girl? The one who follows you around sometimes. She has brown hair and pigtails, wearing a yellow dress. She was standing next to you when you were examining me, but she looked sad. Really, really sad. The room suddenly felt cold. My daughter Emma had died in a car accident 4 years ago. She was 7 years old when it happened, and yes, she had brown hair that she always wore in pigtails. Her favorite dress was yellow with little flowers on it, but there was no way Lisa could have known any of that. We'd never met before tonight, and I don't talk about Emma at work, ever. How do you know about... I started to ask, but I couldn't finish the sentence. She wants you to know she's okay, Lisa said softly. She wants you to stop blaming yourself. She said the accident wasn't your fault, and she's not in pain anymore. I had to step away from the bed. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. Emma's death had been the worst thing that ever happened to me. The guilt, the what-ifs, the constant replaying of that day in my mind. It had destroyed my marriage and nearly ended my career. I'd never told anyone at work about her, never mentioned that I even had a daughter. I'm sorry, Lisa called after me. I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought you should know. I spent the next few minutes in the break room trying to compose myself. When I came back, Lisa was sitting quietly, staring at her hands. Her discharge paperwork was ready, and medically speaking, there was no reason to keep her any longer. Ms. Hartwell, I said, approaching her bed cautiously. Your test results all look normal. You're free to go home, but I want you to have someone drive you. And if you experience any worsening headaches, nausea, or confusion, you need to come back immediately. She nodded and looked up at me. Dr. Webb, I want you to know that I'm not crazy. I know how all this sounds, but I'm telling you the truth about what I experienced. I don't understand it any more than you do. I believe you, I said, and I realized I meant it. As she was getting ready to leave, she turned back to me one more time. She also wanted me to tell you that she likes watching you help people. She's proud of you for becoming a doctor. Emma had died 2 months before I started medical school. She used to say she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up, just like Daddy was going to be. Lisa left that night, and I never saw her again. I looked her up a few weeks later, curious about whether she'd had any similar experiences, but I couldn't find any Lisa Hartwell in our area. No listing in the phone book, no social media profiles, no address matching what was on her license. It was like she didn't exist. I still don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was some kind of near-death experience. Maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that for the first time in 4 years, I felt like Emma was really okay. The guilt that had been eating away at me started to fade, and I began to heal in ways I didn't think were possible. A few weeks later, out of curiosity, I tried looking up Lisa Hartwell to see if she'd had any follow-up care or similar episodes. I searched through local directories, social media, even tried the address that was on her driver's license. But I couldn't find any trace of her anywhere. It was like she had simply disappeared back into whatever corner of the world she'd come from. I never saw her again, and I probably never will. But I still think about that night sometimes, especially during quiet moments in the ER. I wonder if what she experienced was real, if there really is something beyond what we can measure and understand. All I know for certain is that the peace she brought me was genuine, and that's enough. Sometimes I catch myself glancing toward bed 7, half expecting to see her there again with that same knowing look in her eyes. But part of me hopes she won't come back. Some encounters are meant to happen only once, and some messages are too important to risk misinterpreting a second time. My name is Dr. Abigail Warren, and I've been working emergency medicine for 9 years at Metropolitan General Hospital. It's a busy Level 1 trauma center in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where you see everything from minor cuts to multiple gunshot wounds in a single shift. I've always thrived in high-pressure environments, which is probably why I chose emergency medicine in the first place. There's something about the chaos, the split-second decisions, the constant flow of people in crisis that keeps me sharp. Metropolitan General is one of those older hospitals that's been renovated so many times you can't tell what decade any particular section was built in. The ER is relatively modern, but you can still find traces of the original 1960s construction if you know where to look. Exposed pipes in the ceiling, oddly shaped storage rooms, hallways that lead nowhere because they used to connect to wings that have since been demolished. It's the kind of place that develops its own personality over time. I work mostly day shifts now, but for the first 5 years of my career, I was strictly nights. 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., 4 days a week. It was brutal on my social life, but I loved the intensity of night shifts. That's when the really interesting cases come in. The overdoses, the domestic violence calls, the bar fights, the accidents caused by people making bad decisions in the dark. You develop a different rhythm working nights, a different relationship with the hospital itself. This happened during my last month on night shifts, about 4 years ago. I was transitioning to days because I'd gotten engaged and wanted to have something resembling a normal schedule. It was a Thursday night in October, around 2:15 a.m., when the paramedics called in a code blue transport. Male, approximately 60 years old, found down in his apartment by his landlord. No pulse, no respirations. Been down for an unknown amount of time. In emergency medicine, we get a lot of code blues. Patients in cardiac arrest who need immediate resuscitation. Most of them don't make it, especially if they've been down for more than a few minutes. The brain can only survive so long without oxygen, but we still try everything, because you never know when someone might beat the odds. The paramedics wheeled him in about 10 minutes later. His name was Vincent Reeves, according to his wallet, and he looked every bit of his 60-something years. Gray hair, weathered face, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans. He was completely unresponsive. No pulse, no breathing, pupils fixed and dilated. Textbook cardiac arrest. We immediately started CPR and began running through the standard protocol. I was leading the code, calling out orders while the nurses and residents did chest compressions, managed his airway, and pushed medications. It's a choreographed dance that we've all done hundreds of times. Everyone knows their role, everyone moves with purpose. After about 15 minutes of aggressive resuscitation, we got him back. His heart started beating again. He began breathing on his own, and his blood pressure stabilized. It was actually a pretty impressive save, considering how long he'd likely been down. We got him intubated and transferred to the ICU for further monitoring. I thought that was the end of it. Successful resuscitation, patient stabilized, case closed. I moved on to other patients and didn't think about Vincent Reeves again until about an hour later, when one of the ICU nurses called down to the ER. "Dr. Warren," she said, "we need you to come up here. The patient you just sent us is asking for you specifically." "He's awake already?" I asked. Patients who've had cardiac arrest usually take hours or days to regain consciousness, if they ever do. "That's the strange part," she said. He woke up about 10 minutes after we got him settled, and the first thing he said was your name. He keeps saying he needs to talk to Dr. Elena Warren from the ER. I told her I'd be up in a few minutes, after I finished with the patient I was currently seeing, but something about the call bothered me. How did Vincent Reeves know my name? He'd been unconscious the entire time he was in the ER. I hadn't introduced myself, and I don't wear a name tag that's visible during codes. When I got to the ICU, Vincent was sitting up in bed, wide awake and alert. His color was good, his vital signs were stable, and he looked remarkably well for someone who'd been dead less than 2 hours earlier. The intubation tube had already been removed, and he was breathing normally on his own. "Dr. Warren," he said as soon as he saw me, "I've been waiting for you." "How do you know my name, Mr. Reeves?" He smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. There was something unsettling about it, something that made me want to step back from his bed. "I know a lot of things now that I didn't know before. I know you broke up with your fiancé last month because you found out he was cheating. I know you have a scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike as a kid. I know you're thinking about leaving emergency medicine because you're starting to burn out." Every single thing he said was accurate. The breakup had happened exactly 4 weeks earlier, and I hadn't told anyone at work about it. The scar was hidden under my scrubs, invisible unless I was changing clothes. And the burnout was something I'd been thinking about privately but hadn't discussed with anyone. "How do you know all that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I learned a lot during my time away," he said. 15 minutes and 37 seconds to be exact. That's how long I was gone before you brought me back. "You were in cardiac arrest, Mr. Reeves. You weren't conscious during the resuscitation." "I wasn't here," he corrected. "But I was very conscious. More conscious than I've ever been in my life. And I saw things, Dr. Warren. Things about you, about this hospital, about what happens in the spaces between life and death." I pulled up a chair next to his bed, partly because I was curious and partly because my legs suddenly felt unsteady. "What kind of things?" Vincent leaned forward slightly and I caught a whiff of something strange. Not the usual hospital smell of disinfectant and medical equipment. This was different. Earthy, organic, like soil after rain. "I saw the real history of this place," he said quietly. "I saw what happened in room 314 back in 1987, when that nurse made a mistake with the medication, and 3 patients died in one night. I saw the pediatric patient who was buried in the walls during the 1995 renovation. I saw the doctor who's been stealing medications for the past 6 months, selling them to support his gambling habit. Room 314 had been sealed off years before I started working here. According to hospital legend, there had been some kind of incident there in the 1980s, but nobody talked about the details. The renovation he mentioned had happened before my time, but I knew there had been some kind of construction accident. As for the doctor stealing medications, that was news to me, but given what Vincent had already revealed about my personal life, I didn't doubt it. "I saw you too," he continued. "I saw the real reason you became a doctor. It wasn't to help people, was it? It was because of what happened to your little brother." My blood went cold. My brother David had died when I was 14 years old. Leukemia. I'd never told anyone at work about him, never mentioned that his death was what inspired me to go into medicine. It wasn't something I talked about, ever. "What else did you see?" I whispered. Vincent's smile widened, and I noticed that his teeth looked different somehow. Darker, as if they were stained with something I couldn't identify. "I saw the patients who never made it out of this ER," he said. "The ones who died on these tables, in these beds. They're still here, Dr. Warren, all of them. Waiting in the spaces between the walls, between the floors, between one heartbeat and the next, and they're angry." "Angry about what?" "About being brought back," he said. "About being pulled away from where they were going. Every time you save someone, every time you restart a heart that's already stopped, you're interrupting a journey. You're forcing souls to turn around and come back to a place they were ready to leave." I stood up, suddenly feeling nauseous. "Mr. Reeves, I think you should rest. You've been through a trauma, and sometimes that can cause confusion or hallucinations." "Sit down, doctor," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me obey before I even realized I was moving. "I'm not finished yet." The room felt colder now, and the smell of earth was getting stronger. I could hear something that sounded like whispers coming from the ventilation system, but when I listened more carefully, I realized they were coming from Vincent himself. Not from his mouth, but from somewhere inside him, as if other voices were speaking through his body. "They want me to give you a message," he said. the ones who are trapped here because of what you do. They want you to know that every life you save comes with a price. Every heart you restart disturbs the balance. Every time you pull someone back from the edge, something else gets pushed over it. That doesn't make any sense, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Doesn't it? Vincent tilted his head to one side, studying me. Haven't you noticed the patterns? The way certain patients keep coming back, over and over, with injuries that should have killed them? The way some of your colleagues have started having nightmares about work? The way the hospital itself seems to be getting darker, colder, more oppressive? He was right, and that terrified me. Over the past few months, I had noticed an increase in repeat patients, people who seemed to have an unusual number of near-fatal accidents. Several nurses had mentioned having disturbing dreams about the hospital, and there was something about the atmosphere in the ER lately that felt heavier, more ominous. "What are you saying I should do?" I asked. "Stop fighting so hard," Vincent said. "When someone's time comes, let them go. Stop pulling them back from where they need to be. The dead don't belong with the living, Dr. Warren, and the longer you keep interfering with that boundary, the thinner it becomes." I wanted to argue with him, to tell him that saving lives was my job, my calling, my purpose. But looking at Vincent Reeves sitting there in his hospital bed, with his dark stained teeth and his impossible knowledge and the smell of grave dirt emanating from his skin, I couldn't find the words. "I have to go," I said, standing up again. "Of course you do," Vincent replied. "But remember what I told you, and remember that I'll be watching from now on. We all will be." I left the ICU and went back to the ER, but I couldn't concentrate on my remaining patients. Every time I tried to examine someone or make a decision about treatment, I kept hearing Vincent's words. When my shift ended at 7 a.m., I went straight home and called in sick for the next 3 days. When I finally came back to work, I asked about Vincent Reeves. The ICU nurse told me he died the night after I spoke with him. Sudden cardiac arrest, couldn't be resuscitated. She said it was unusual. Patients who recover as well as he did typically don't have secondary arrests so quickly. His death was unexpected, but medically speaking, it wasn't impossible. Sometimes the damage from the initial arrest catches up with patients even after they seem to recover. I transferred to day shifts the following month as I'd already planned, but the real reason wasn't my engagement. That had already ended. It was because I couldn't face another night shift, knowing that Vincent and whatever he represented were still there, waiting in the spaces between life and death. I still work at Metropolitan General, and I still save lives every day. But I've noticed changes in myself, in the way I approach certain cases. When someone comes in with multiple traumatic injuries, when their heart has been stopped for too long, when everything medical tells me they should be allowed to die peacefully, sometimes I find myself hesitating. Sometimes I wonder if Vincent was right about the price we pay for playing with the boundary between life and death. And late at night, when I'm finishing up paperwork or reviewing charts, I sometimes catch a whiff of that earthy smell in the air. When that happens, I know it's time to go home.